great. Thanks for coming again. And it looks like the room has cooled down a little bit from what it was about for those who were here about half an hour ago. So thanks for coming.
And I think most of you know IDC. We have roughly now about 1,000 analysts in 52 countries. The presentation outline that we're going to be following, we're going to cover our normal HPC research activities, and then we'll walk through the usual update as far as what's going on in the market, the number of sales, the growth rates, the areas that are shifting and changing. Then we're going to address something in a little different format. We're going to address some of the major IT trends that are taking place in the market. Leading to what Steve will be covering is our new HPDA services where big data meets high performance computing. And Steve's been doing some real exciting research then. And as I mentioned, then we'll be announcing the early results of the innovation and ROI model. And we're making this available for everyone. So if you want copies of the model itself, the data structure, and that we'll actually be sending to everyone who signed up. And by the way, if you didn't sign up or register, please leave your email address if you want a copy of the slides, because we'll be sending those out to everyone. And then, of course, we'll be announcing the Innovation Award winners, too. I think most of you are familiar with us, but just a little background. We do try to track every HPC server sold each quarter. And I would say from a census viewpoint, we're at least at the 80% level, hopefully closer to 90% of all the servers sold. There's a few exceptions right now. Historically, we never track things like what's going on in Russia and that. We've added that in. We've also done a lot of work adding in what's going on in China, but we don't track the Chinese military or the Russian military. So kind of the traditional classified military portions of those regions are the only ones that are missing in the data at this time. We also have to publish over 45 research reports a year. I think we ran around 85, 90 last year. So that's our minimal on that part. The other thing we're doing, and we announced this 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, every time there's a new major supercomputer announcement or a new type of technology, we try to fly out there within a month and we do our entire 3-hour survey of the site. So we'll be flying out to NUDT in mid-July. And in all the different areas you'll see, we have to maintain a 5-year forecast. And the numbers we walk through are just some sampling of the data that we do. So with that as the background, the other thing I should mention is we do use the word HPC or high performance computing to cover all technical servers. So that includes things as small as a $5,000 server. And some people refer that to more of technical computing market, but just for our terminology, we're using HPC to cover every technical server. And so here's some of the highlights. First of all, 2012 was another banner year, and the market actually exceeded $11 billion. And so, just tremendous growth in the marketplace. We're going to talk a little bit also about first quarter 13 because that's where our major market change did take place. As you've noticed in our charts for since 2008, 2009, where the recession happened, the high end of the market just kept growing. There was no recession in supercomputers, but the lower half of the market shrunk. And I mean shrunk, it got cut in almost half. And what happened in first quarter is the lower half of the market is back into a high growth mode. So some very different dynamic there that's taking place. We'll walk through how we know the specifics there, but in a nutshell, we've created a whole new process of doing what we call micro surveys. It's a 1-minute survey, and we're doing 1,000 a week right now to measure what's going on in the lower half of the market and have a better understanding of what's taking place there. And you're familiar with the other bullets, but the other one is, really big data and accelerators are the hottest new technologies, as everyone knows. So we're putting together a lot of definitions, market tracking around those areas. So with that as background, this is what happened in the market last year. As I mentioned, just tremendous market growth here. Again, the high end of the market, 29%. How many IT sectors grew at 29% last year? I mean, we track a lot of them, and I think that's the highest growth sector by a large amount. As I mentioned, the lower half of the market, work group didn't do too bad, but as a whole, you can see it's been shrinking. And this lower half is what's now just gone back into a growth mode starting in first quarter. Then this is what happens on units. And the interesting picture here, if you notice, the unit numbers are all negative. And what's basically happened in the market is everybody is buying larger systems. The price tag of an average system, whether you're buying at the low end of the market, the middle, or the high end, you're spending more per system. And a lot of that is related to putting accelerators in. A lot of it is the issue of when you have lots of cores in the machine, what's the first easiest step to make use of them is put a lot more memory in the machine. So you're seeing more content in it. And of course, higher capability interconnect and more inbuilt storage. So this is a snapshot of what's going on the processor side. the market, and you can see there's some very unusual things. For example, the risk portion leaped massively here. A bulk of that is the recon system. So whenever you see one giant system come in, it can swing in the market when the numbers are small. Overall, the market clearly x86 is the dominant portion of the market right now. But the interesting part is the number of processors going into the market are growing quite dramatically. And that ties to the systems getting larger and the system price tags getting larger. But fairly sizable growth there. Here's how it looks by the different manufacturers in the market. You can see over the last few years, HP and IBM have kind of been in lockstep, first, second place position. Then Dell clearly has been in the third place position here. Interesting, almost an even year for Dell. And then you can see the smaller vendors like Cray and SGI, Fujitsu and NEC. You see some tremendous roller coaster things based on large systems. My favorite number is actually the Fujitsu Recon system, because that number is larger than all of Japan in a normal year. Japan normally doesn't even get that large. So you have one system that is more than a whole country's sale. So this roller coaster effect we think is going to be just exaggerated and continue to grow quite heavily. And so here's our forecast by the different competitive segments. You can see we're forecasting about a 6.8 to 7% growth rate. We do expect to see this lower part of the market recover more strongly. We most likely are going to have to redo our forecast next quarter, though, because all these surveys we're getting in the lower half is showing more growth than we're showing here. And so these forecasts are going to be upticked on that. And as you're familiar, we also look at all the different verticals that are taking place in the market. No surprise, there's some major growth going on in the economic financial sector right now, and also the geosciences are fairly high growth mode. I should mention the government lab number, although it doesn't look very large here, this is where some of the substantial initial growth was. Like between these 2 years here, you see a 25% growth. So the government lab business is kind of like becoming the juggernaut of the industry. And here's the broader market when you look at servers, which is everything I just talked about, the storage, middleware, application, and this is repair services. This is not professional, services like for rewriting codes. This is maintenance and repair services. And you can see storage continues to outstrip everything else in growth rates by a couple percentages. And we see the continued robustness in storage. We also saw very strong storage growth, year by year. And the different events around the world as far as, lack of supply of disk drives and things like that had no impact in HPC whatsoever. With that as a quick background on just where the market stands, what I'd like to do is walk through some interesting comparisons of some different countries. In other words, I'd mentioned this lumpy behavior that's taking place. In addition to that, if you look at each country is on a very different profile. And since we have so many slides, I'm going to walk through these fairly quickly. Political leaders are clearly stating that supercomputing is crucial, to having competitive products in Russia. In Korea, of course, Korea is one of our favorite examples because the Koreans were smart enough to actually put it into their laws that supercomputing is important. And we challenge other nations to do the same thing, because we think that's just tremendous, of course. And of course, the U.S. always, enforces supercomputing. Unfortunately, the U.S. hasn't stepped up to the exascale funding that people are hoping for. And the European Commission has done tremendous investments right now on core supercomputing. And in addition to that, Europe is launching some major application areas to really have leadership. And I have to say, in my personal view, this is one of the best strategies that can take place. And that is pick out a couple application areas that you have strong expertise in already, that you feel you can lead the world for the next decade, and really put your money against those. And so, this is just tremendous. So with that as the background, so this is what the worldwide market has looked like for roughly the last 10 years. And you can see the tremendous buildup, the recession flattened out the market, and then back to the buildup here for the whole market. But as I mentioned, the supercomputers never saw the recession. So that's the worldwide market. Keep in mind this layout, because I'll use the same layout then for 4 or 5 countries here. So in the US, you can see the supercomputer growth was fairly substantial here, but you'll see not as robust in other countries. China is the amazing one. Everyone knows China's investing more, but China is on an absolute consistent lockstep growth curve, and heavily at the high end of the market. So you can see China is really putting it in the visibility part of the market. If you strip out the other part there, the growth isn't quite the same. but it's very much a lockstep growth each year. The interesting thing for us, for example, when we visit NUDT is, what type of price tag goes on the system? Is that a $300 million system? Is it a $500 million system? And singular systems like that can have quite a big impact, you can see on the scale there. So Japan. Now Japan's been in what we call the true roller coaster market here. You see going up, down, and this is roughly where it landed in 2012. And 2013 in Japan will probably be somewhere near the average here. So you see the tremendous lumpy behavior there. Germany, well, what would you expect in Germany? Much like China, it's very lockstep, well-planned growth. Again, with supercomputers, really didn't see any impact of the recession outside of it went faster. So kind of contrary trends. A lot of nations made the decision when the economic crisis hit is let's invest in R&D, let's make our products more competitive, let's become more scientific and increase our capabilities so that coming out of the recession we'll be the strongest country. And you can see Germany clearly has implemented that strategy, and very wisely in my view. France, very similar curve. The French on the supercomputer side basically accelerated, after the recession. Overall, did not really, the recession caused France to flatten out, but no decline to speak of. So again, very strong investment in R&D. So that gives you kind of a snapshot of the different countries. We do track 27 countries right now. So if you have any interest in other ones, just send us an email. So next I'd like to talk about some new research activities we've been involved in. We've just completed our new end-user multi-client study. We generally do that every 18 months to 2 years. This is a study that's a 3-hour interview that we do of hundreds of sites. This particular one, we had 905 systems in the study. And you'll be seeing a lot of information rolled out from that. And we actually then generate a report in each one of the areas: processors, middleware, application areas. We've also just launched a big data HPDA CIS service, which Steve is leading, and he'll be covering a lot of the details there. Just as an overview, when we looked at the whole big data issue, and we've had a lot of presentations at our meetings, and I think you've been doing it for 3.5 years?
About 4 now.
Well, 4 now. I'm always behind time. So about 4 years. And the biggest issue we felt is what the world needs is a lot of examples of big data. Everyone says, well, how do you define big data? What is it? What is the hype? And our view is what we really want to do is to have a lot of examples. And once you have a lot of examples, you can kind of decide which category it is and that part. So Steve has created a tremendous number of case studies, examples, success stories, how people are doing it, and then sharing that. The third one, which is we'll be announcing today, and we'll walk through some of the details, is the program that we thank the Department of Energy for funding. And it's on creating an economic model that shows the return on investment for HPC. So the inputs are investments in high-performance computing, and the outputs are revenues, profits, and jobs. So that's the first half of the model. And again, we assume everything else stays the same as you do with economic modeling. The second half of the model is investments in HPC and innovation. And we actually have an innovation index, and we'll walk through parts of that. We're also expanding the Innovation Award Program, and Steve will be announcing our 5th round of winners on the Innovation Award Program. We had more submissions this time around than we've ever had in the past. And the last bullet here I just wanted to mention is we've been trying to be a little more creative in actually how we do our work internally. I mentioned that we're doing what I call the micro surveys, 1-second surveys, and I'll explain later on why we're doing that. But it's to collect really very broad data and actually find who the missing middle is. But we've also created this Pulse program to do what we call nano surveys. And they're basically on a topical area, and it's something that we can actually implement and get the answers in 3 to 4 weeks. And so we thank everyone in here who's already joined to be on the technical panel of that, but it's something new that we're trying now. So with that, I'd like to switch gears and talk about some major IT trends that we see. And we see these actually driving the whole IT industry, and you'll see how it's driving big data and other parts. But it's basically, from an IDC perspective, there's 3 major pillars, and that's mobility, broadband, social for business, cloud, and big data. And this is really what we call the third platform. And if you think of the first platform as being the traditional mainframe and terminals, where you had millions of users and thousands of apps, and that was 25, 30 years ago. And then really with the internet, client-server PC, you moved to a lot more users. And the third platform that we see evolving right now really is based on these 4 pillars that I mentioned. And we see HPC having a major role in a number of these. The big data analytics, we're seeing for the first time HPC used by companies like PayPal, Geico, traditional places that you wouldn't call technical computing are now moving to HPC. And also on the HPC side for cloud services, we're not seeing clouds used by people to do HPC so much right now, but we're seeing clouds used to deliver HPC cycles to small, medium businesses and people who previously really didn't have a data center. And we also think with the cloud model, if certain things change, you could see a major shift in the use of clouds in HPC. And along with that, with these new pillars, we think it's going to come together in a very different way, and it's going to create a lot of new business opportunities. And if you're interested in some of these, we actually are doing whole reports and trying to identify where we think the new services are and the new business opportunities. And we do think it's changing significantly how different industries are making the decision-making process. And what our hope is here is that people will move from making decision-making processes to control costs to more around being competitive and innovative. And more broad, you see that a lot in HPC, but we're actually expecting that to show up more across the whole world of computing. And so the new focus will be on more of outcomes versus outputs, and then innovation. So instead of trying to minimize the whole operational thing, it's all going to be around how you can deliver the services in volume.